We interview a young man from the Kingston Polygamy group next on Polygamy. What love is this?
She was born into polygamy. Her family followed the teachings of Joseph Smith, including plural marriage. Like many young girls, she had been promised to a man who was her father's age, but she ran away. That girl was me. I was lost. Then Jesus Christ found me. I found real freedom. He is a shield to all who will take refuge in Him.
Welcome to today's program. A few weeks ago, with his permission, on one of our shows, we read a comment from a young man as he revealed some work experiences as a young boy being raised in the Kingston Polygamy group. After he gave permission for me to share his remarks, he also agreed to be interviewed as a guest on our program. So first, I'd like to read a portion of what he wrote and then introduce him and learn more of his story. He had been talking about being sent to the Kingston-owned farm in the Tetons in Idaho, basically used as slave labor. He described getting up every morning at 5 o'clock and moving the irrigation pipes and being paid 10 cents for each pipe he moved. Now that's heavy and hard work. And then he would take a breakfast break and a short rest and then back to work for the rest of the day. I'd like to quote some of what he said. Making $7.25 an hour, if that, for 8 straight hours. Then move pipe again in the evening. Then do chores at the farmhouse, eat dinner, go to bed, and do it all again the next day and every day, end quote. He said that the workers are basically cheap child labor and don't actually see any of the money they earn, and on top of all that, they are charged room and board for the food they eat and the bed they sleep in. The ages of these child workers, he said, are very often under 16 years old. This was the experience of our guest, so I would like to introduce and welcome Caleb Owen. Thank you, Caleb.
Thank you.
Thanks for agreeing to come.
It's my pleasure.
Share your story. And that really interested me when you made those remarks. It was on a private Facebook page. Mm-hmm. And that's why I asked you if you had a story that you would like to share with mm-hmm. people. When people come out of polygamy, when they come out of private groups like these, sometimes they're afraid to talk about their experiences for various mm-hmm. reasons. And so I'm glad, especially a male, very rarely will talk about their experiences. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad you're here, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. So we're going to talk about your story and what's happened to you and why and how you left and all that goes around that. But first, let's start first with your families. Some families I know in the Kingston Polygamy group were not polygamous. Were your parents polygamous?
No, they were not, but that's not for lack of my father's trying.
What was it, a lack of?
Well, he personally believes in polygamy as a way to receive salvation, and I personally believe this. I believe that he would, if he could, take another wife, but my mother is very headstrong and wouldn't let that happen, as well as, I guess, apparently they consider themselves happily married.
Well, that's good that they consider themselves happily married. And you know what? I know of families. I have sisters who have done that in the Kingston group who had just not allowed their husbands to take plural wives. Mm-hmm. And that's good. That saves them a lot of heartbreak. But doesn't your father feel like maybe he's being cheated out of a high degree of glory? Is that a problem with the situation?
Well, that's one thing that I've always been curious about, because he's not really very open about many things. But I have noticed that in the months and in fact the year before I actually left, he'd been attending a lot more priesthood classes, going to Salt Lake City almost every month or every week of every month from January to March, just priesthood class after priesthood class, trying to learn how to receive the next level, which, according to their own doctrine, you cannot receive unless you practice polygamy.
That was going to be my next question. So do you think that he will finally end up living polygamy, or is your mother pretty adamant about this?
I feel that eventually it's going to get to the point where it's going to be kind of a choice between the two of them, whether because I don't personally think she'll ever let it happen. I don't think he's ever going to get his way. Yeah. And I think he's not as favored in the church as he likes to think he was, because
of it, huh?
I've noticed since I've left that my family they won't say anything to me because I'm now ex-order, but I know from experience that once a family member leaves, the rest of the family is kind of ostracized. Even inside the order, they're not given as much opportunities. And I personally have seen young women who've grown to the age of 18 without ever being married, which is shocking in the order.
It is, yeah. And I might want to mention right now that Caleb has mentioned the word order a few times. That's what insiders, members call the Kingston group. It's called the Order, right? Because it's based on the United Order format, so they just shorten it to the Order. When I was in it, we would call it the Co-op, because its name was the Davis County Cooperative Society. So it goes by the Co-op or the Order, the Kingston group, or the Kingston Clan, but it's still all the same organization. So your dad never took another wife. How many siblings do you have then, just from your mother?
I'm gonna have to count here because I always get. I'm gonna say 8, including myself. But we do have a couple more that were adopted because they kept running away from home. They ran away from the Roundy group, which is another polygamous group in Territon. And their names, I won't mention them, but they did run away several times, and they were taken in by my family until they came of age. One of them has completely left all polygamous groups and lives a very happy life somewhere in Burley, Idaho, I believe. And the other one is married inside the order.
Really? My goodness. So you have eight plus 2 adopted ones. Okay, well, that's a nice
Including
large
myself.
family. And most polygamous families are large. Even if it's just from one wife, they're still large families. When you agreed to do the interview with me, I sent you an email and I asked you the question, why you agreed to the interview and what specific topics that you wanted to discuss. And so, because, I want you to discuss what's comfortable with you and not to talk about anything that is uncomfortable for you. But you said, I want to talk about what life is like in the outer edges of the cult. And of course, this would be the fringes. So that was the first point. So were you and your family on the outer edges? Were you at the fringes of the Kingston group?
We kind of were, because you have the main church. I guess, I don't know what you'd call them, maybe wards. That's what the term they use in the Mormon church. There's the main ward, which is the Damon Palmer building here in Salt Lake City, where the vast majority of the members go to church. We have the first and second ward, the morning and afternoon churches. And then we have one more down, I'm drawing a blank, but we called it the Mine, down there. We have one down
in
there,
Huntington.
in Huntington, Utah, yes. And then we have one more up in Teton, and I'm now just being told that they have another one in Territon. The ones in Teton and Territon are the smallest. The
small ones.
The one in Territon, honestly, we have 3 families there that are part of the group.
And Territon is a small town in Idaho.
Yes, it's a very, very small town. It has literally one grocery store, and it's more of a convenience store now than anything.
So how did they treat the fringe families?
They kind of really didn't exist on a large scale. For instance, every Sunday we'd have to go to church, as that's the rules. You can't break the rules, it's just an unwritten law. You'd go to church every Sunday and you'd come back and you'd go to co-op training every week, every Wednesday, or every first Wednesday of the month, and it was just a continual thing.
What's co-op training?
Co-op training is more of just like training young people to work for the co-op.
Oh, yes, of course.
Through biblical teachings that explain to children that overworking them at a young age is okay.
Yeah, right.
Well, the thing was, it's a very long drive. It's about an hour to get to the Teton Church, from where Territon is. And the majority of the families, there's 3 of us, and they're big families. We don't make a lot of money because the order, keeps the wages, and we get what we can out if it's with their will.
Right.
As a result, gas money is very scarce, and people have trouble getting up there every week. So one of the church leader up here in Teton actually went down to Brother Paul and asked him if he would be willing to let us create another group in Territon so they wouldn't have to drive that far every Sunday, because he said, and I quote, this is what he said in church, I remember it to this day. I asked him, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on it now. Let's see, let me give you, I got it now. I got it. So he said, well, people can't afford not to go to church. That's exactly what he said.
Oh.
In other words, we can't afford
the gas to go,
but you can't afford not to go. So instead of solving the situation and giving us another church which was closer and less expensive, he blew us off and just left it at that. And that's just a normal thing. It's just people didn't even bat an eye when they heard it, because of course Brother Paul's right, but that's literally the extent of how much they talk about the group in Territon. Other than that, it's like we don't even exist.
Okay, so so you were now being a fringe family. Would that be like, well, you weren't part of the Kingston family or the Kingston bloodline?
No.
Would that have any bearing on it at all? Just
That would, yes, I believe it would. They'll deny it up and down, but we weren't. We're the Owens. We kind of helped found the group.
You did, yes.
But
the Owens did.
We're not Kingstons, and apparently because my mom's a part of the Peterson family, and they left a couple of times and came back in. It was kind of an in and out thing, and as a result, they were given the rumor that they had black blood in them, which was a huge problem.
To them, that's a big problem.
To them, it's a problem. Yes.
Yeah.
To any other rational human being, it's no more strange than having blonde hair.
That's right.
But as a result, my family's kind of been kept on the outside, and as is pretty much anyone that's related to us, because now we're supposedly tainted.
Because you've got Peterson in your heritage, right. And my family was on the fringe too, by the way, the Hansons. My grandfather was part of the initial signers as they began the group, and so he was one of the charter members at the beginning, but we weren't Kingston, and my mother didn't marry a Kingston, and so therefore we were fringe family too. But we were required to be as faithful and as hardworking and give them all our money, just like everybody else was as well. So,
but you made even less.
You make less, and you're treated worse. You said one of the things you wanted to talk about was, you said, I want to kind of touch on how the order affects young people with mental issues. So I would like you to explain the mental issues that you saw in the group and the results of their treatment. What is that all about?
Well, like, people would joke about homosexuality. They would mock people with disabilities, and basically just like, suicide was more of a joke to them. It's just not a real thing. But I remember quite vividly, there's a story of this young girl and her 3 friends, or I'm not sure, I think they were half sisters. I don't know, the bloodline is so mixed up in the Kingston family. But either way, they all had a suicide pact to kill themselves because they wanted to leave the order. But one of them couldn't take it and killed themselves early, and the rest saw the impact of what it had done, and that one of the women was remarried to my cousin, and to this day they still probably have mental issues. They're not getting any help for them. People who are homosexual are taken to private classes with Brother Paul, and I heard this from Brother Paul's brother's son, from one of his favorite wives, I might add, who told me about how they would be taken into these classes and explained how their attraction to the same sex is wrong and how they can fix it just by believing differently. And that's just a number of things. And I know I mentioned mental disorder, but to me homosexuality is no more mental disorder than being attracted to a female if you're a male. Well,
but they treat these different mental disorders other than how the love of God would want us to treat them according to the Bible. They say they use the Bible, but they really don't, because Jesus said we're supposed to love everybody, love our neighbors. Sinners, we're all sinners. And we can't just say, well, I don't like you because your sin is different than mine. And that's the way they treat. Now, on that suicide pact, we were doing the live show on TV 20 at that time in 2011. It was the beginning of 2011, and I had received an anonymous email from one of the people that was in the pact, and she was really concerned about it. And so we did a special show, opening up the telephone lines for anybody to call in from the Kingston group and give us any information. They could do it anonymously. They didn't have to give names or anything, so that we could help any of the girls that was involved with that pact. And after that show, I got an email from the girl who had started it, and she said, this isn't the way it was supposed to work. The pact is off. But somehow or other, I never did find out who it was, so that I could never talk to them and try and encourage them myself. But later, one of the girls did commit suicide. She hung herself in the garage, didn't she? Yeah. Did. So, and nobody gets any issues, any counseling, no help from any.
That doesn't exist. The doctor's office is like a joke to them. They don't even believe in going to the doctor.
Yeah.
Like me being When I was young, I had my arm pulled out of my socket. I don't remember the details exactly because I was very,
Ew.
very little. But I don't remember ever going to hospital.
Yeah.
To this day, the only time I've ever been to hospital is when I stepped on a rake, and it was a rusted rake, and it drove through my heel, but it didn't draw blood, so I most likely had tetanus because my parents never gave me any vaccines.
Yeah.
So then I was taken to hospital, but they still wouldn't let me get any vaccines to prevent tetanus.
Really?
Nope.
So what they do, just clean out the wound and hope for the best?
Apparently.
Oh my goodness.
I've actually gone to hospital myself, and actually my doctor, and I've actually been trying to get my own vaccinations done because I would like to live.
and live an abundant, healthy life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And that's one of the other quirks that that the Kingston group has. I think all the polygamy groups do to a certain degree, but especially the Kingston group.
They don't believe in doctors.
They don't believe in doctors. They don't believe in taking care of yourself in a modern medical fashion at all.
That's why I'm really grateful for my mother, because she doesn't really believe in vaccines, at least from what I understand, but she's still willing to take us to the doctor, take us to the dentist, she got my wisdom teeth pulled, and all these different things that most likely wouldn't have happened if it was just up to someone else.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like you have a mother that was very loving and kind and cared a little more than some of them have. The next thing you said you wanted to talk about was, you said, I want to talk about how it is now that I've left and found out that the outside isn't as evil as they said it is. Now, realistically, everywhere we go in this world, we're going to find sin and evil. Everywhere we go, outside the group, but there's also much evil inside the polygamy group. What kind of evils did they warn you about, and how did you discover that it's not all the way they said it was?
Well, they mainly just mentioned that they constantly went over the fact that only in the order can you live all of God's laws. Only in the order can you love one another and be part of a group where you treat each other as God intended and live your life in a manner pleasing to God. And now that I've left, I look back and think, see, I volunteer at the homeless shelter as often as I can. I would never be allowed to do that in the order. They don't believe in helping
That's right,
anyone
they don't.
outside the order.
They don't.
For another example is, like, they would explain how you wouldn't be able to make it outside the order. The only way you can survive is inside the order, where they provide you a home, they provide you with food, they provide you with money, all three of which are bald-faced lies.
Yeah.
Because now that I've left, I've found if I want to go to the movies and watch a movie, there's nothing stopping me, but I just have to make sure I have money and have the day off from work.
And you don't have a guilt trip going, like they
No.
would give you a huge guilt trip for going and spending the money.
When I actually left, I had to go through I called three different people to get a hold of the person to give me my money. And I actually had a pretty good ruse. I planned to go to college, and I'd been telling people in the group beforehand, so I kind of feel pretty clever about that. And I actually had to fight for like half an hour, half a day almost, just trying to get the money. And they finally sent me $3,000. And even then, the check was intercepted by my father, who kept it for a bit. And then he finally relented and gave it to me, and I put a down payment on an apartment, and I moved out in November. And to this day, like, I remember vividly the first time that I tried to get money out of my bank. I have a bank account now, and I remember going to my aunt who handles the money for the order up in Territon, and you'd have to go to her, you'd have to call the place, you'd have to get an authorization number, you'd have to make sure the money was on your statement, and you get it signed out, and then you get the cash. And that whole procedure can take 10, 15 minutes. I went to the bank, and I walked in, and I started to give this great big long explanation on why I needed the money so I could go to the fair.
To the teller, huh? To the bank teller.
And she couldn't have cared less.
Yeah.
She just handed me the 50, and I walked out.
And you know, people who are watching the show don't have a clue what that does to us when we're raised having to beg for every penny that we want to spend, and then get lectured. Well, you don't need that much money. You don't need money for that, and sometimes won't give it to you or not give you as much as you ask for, and so on. And then go into the outside world where you go to a bank, and there's so much difference in the way you're treated. But unless they've experienced that horrible treatment, they can't imagine the difference it is to us.
You know, like, to this day, I still, whenever I get hungry, I can go into my kitchen and I can eat food. Or sometimes, like, when I work at a fast food place, And to this day, like, still shocks me to be able to walk in and reach into my pocket and pull out my wallet, and there will be money in there. And I hand them my money, and they give me food, and it's food that I can have.
Yeah.
That like it's mine. I paid for it with my money that I worked for.
That you worked for, and they gave you a paycheck for. They didn't just.
They give me a paycheck
on a
precisely
statement.
every other
Exactly.
week at 4 p.m. on Thursday, every time,
And it's
without
dependable.
fail.
So tell me something, Caleb. When I left, and I would spend money, even though I had worked for it the same as you, get a job, earn the money, get the paycheck, so on, I would have guilt trips spending that money. Did you, or do you still have those guilt
Still,
trips?
all the time. Like,
still
I feel
have-
like the worst person ever when I like treat myself to like an ice cream cone. Like today on the trip down to Salt Lake City, we stopped at a Dairy Queen, and I got a dipped cone, and that was the first time I've ever had a dipped cone in my entire
Oh,
life.
really? Oh,
And it was
my.
like the greatest thing ever. But after I ate it, I felt like that was a colossal waste of money. But then like, even now, like, I'm just trying to convince myself, you know, it was an ice cream cone.
Yeah.
You were hungry, you needed a snack.
You know, the Bible tells us that God makes all things for us to enjoy. Mm-hmm. And as long as we are living the right kind, you know, you didn't steal the money, you didn't hike a bank to get the money or anything. It's well hard-earned money. You can buy yourself a dip cone. There's no problem.
that's like-
God doesn't care.
That like reminds me of another situation. I've only had Nesquik. I don't know if you ever heard of Nesquik, the drink mix.
Yeah.
I've had it twice in my life. The first time, I was staying at my uncle's house, and he'd left the order. He's a Mormon, and he'd left the order, but he had some, and we were staying there, and he let me have some. And then the other day, we were shopping a few days before we came down, and we saw the can of Nesquik, and I remembered I'd been wanting it because it's good. It's a
Yeah,
good drink, and we bought it. And I have that at home, and I have a picture of me posing next to the can with a glass of it.
I love it.
It's the greatest thing ever. It's the most delicious thing I've ever had. And
That's
I mean,
funny.
it's just strange to be able to buy that stuff, because
Yeah.
even if you do manage to get a hold of money in the order, you're still facing the guilt trip of your parents telling you, well, you're buying unhealthy stuff that's going to kill you. Like, they'll tell me, there's one person in the order who's told me that bacon still is from an unclean animal, and you shouldn't eat bacon. And it's kind of...
They need to read Mark chapter 7. Jesus declared all foods clean in Mark chapter 7. So, and that's the New Testament too. Back to a conversation we had previously. So everything on the outside of in the outside world you have discovered is not evil, like they explained. But explain the evil of racism. That, you know, there is evil inside of those polygamy groups, and racism is just one of them. What was their attitude towards the race?
Well, in their mindset, it all depends on person to person, because I have a cousin who used to be racist, and then when my grandfather died, he kind of took a good long look at how he was being so racist, and he realized, because my grandfather, Grandpa Carlos Owen, he was the least racist person. He was completely tolerant, and his favorite quote from the Bible was "black or white, bond or free." And I don't remember the exact quote, but that was the gist of it. He didn't care. And I remember when I was little, we would use the N-word all the time. Like, it was just like a conjunction in a sentence. And it was-
In the group, yeah.
We'd mock black people. We would make fun of Mexicans and Asian people, and pretty much anyone who wasn't white and from Europe.
Yeah.
But
That's
I
their
remember
attitude.
I used that N-word, and then my cousin, he said, don't use that around me. And then I realized, and I was like, why? And he said, because that's not what Grandpa would have wanted. And even now, I still try to live up to his example
Yeah.
of you don't bring race in anything. Race has nothing to do with
right.
it. It's literally just pigments of melanism.
That's all it is. That's all it is. And we go back. If you go back to the Bible, which they claim to teach biblical principles, there's only one race, and that's the human race. There's only one
Exactly.
race, and we're all humans, and all humans are created in the image of God. It doesn't matter what color, or what stripe, or where they're from. We're all made in the image of God, and God wants us to love our neighbor as ourselves. Yeah, they have had that racism. They had it really bad when I was there as well, and it doesn't sound like it's changed.
Not at all.
Not any.
But at least in my family, I've noticed that it's kind of slowed down
That's good.
heavily. And
That's
I'm
good.
really glad about that.
You said, I want to talk about what happened to me. And so we want to tell your story, but you know what? We only have about 3 minutes left, and your story is your personal story is going to take longer than 3 minutes. So let's just lead into it, and then we will do part 2. And then finish telling your particular story. But as we lead into it, was there a particular event or particular teaching that the Kingston group did that helped you or caused your decision to leave?
Not necessarily. Well, technically yes, but technically no. Again, I've been suffering with depression and mental issues my whole life, and around in 2017 in February, I was like really feeling it because it was just really, really rough for me that time of year. It's it's the month of love and whatever. And I had made some friends in school, and I was always discouraged to be friends with them. And for a long time, I'd been doubting and like completely just like rejecting all the teachings. I've been like having trouble believing them since I was 10 years old, about the same time that the mental issues started. And at that time, I just went up to my friend and said, "Hey, can you get me someone that I can, someday maybe become a partner with, find like a girlfriend for me or a boyfriend or whatever." And they did. They came through, and I met Ainsley White. She's here right now. She's the most beautiful person I've ever met. She's amazing. She's sweet. She's kind. And that was like really what turned it for me, because right after that I realized this didn't come from the order. The order is just full of it.
And she's not part of the order.
Nope.
And she's a sweet person. So people outside of the order, not just her, but obviously her, can be nice people, not evil.
Like, she's literally the best thing that has ever happened to me in my entire life, and she's not part of the order. So if the best thing that ever happened to me wasn't a part of the order, how can the order be right?
Yeah. Well, we all have different ways of approaching that when we do leave, because we are told, and all the other polygamy groups, the FLDS and other polygamy groups are told the same thing, that the people outside of the group, the only safe place to be is inside the group. When the world ends, it's going to end suddenly, and if you're not in the group, you're going to be destroyed with the rest of the world, but we're going to be saved, and so on and so forth. But we find out that certainly is not true. Well, we're going to wind down now on this one, and then we'll tell your story of what you went through to leave. And explain why you left and how old you were and so on and so forth. But I want to thank you for coming, and I want to thank you for having the courage and the willingness to share, because it's important. If people are wanting to get out, they should be able to get out. So we'll see you in the next one. And we do thank Caleb for his story, and that he cares to share it with others, especially those who maybe consider leaving their membership in a polygamy group. There is life after polygamy, an abundant life after polygamy, and we want to say that that God doesn't care if you leave a polygamy group. In fact, He'll probably bless you even more if you do. So thanks for Caleb, and stay tuned for part 2 as we discuss the story of his leaving. Thank you.